Cardinal News is telling the little-known stories of Virginia's role in our country's march to independence. As we head toward America's 250th anniversary, we'll examine the events, people, and places that shaped the Commonwealth and the nation. Together we can better understand the role of our ancestors beyond what's in the history books. This is Cardinal 250, made possible in part by funding from the Virginia American Revolution 250 Commission.
Welcome to Cardinal News 250. I'm Dutchie Jessee. July 1774 wasn't so unlike July 2024 in Tappahannock, Virginia. It was hot, politics were tense, and locals gathered within view of the water to hear the Essex Resolutions, the 16 items colonists listed as reasons they would not support England's intolerable acts and how they would respond. For the 250th anniversary of the resolutions, one of 30 crafted by Virginia counties for the summer of 1774, the Essex County Museum held an afternoon of festivities on July 13th, culminating in a Hamilton-inspired performance of the resolutions. Now, everything I just said there is a lead-in to the article in our Cardinal 250 series that's written by Manley, and this installment focuses on the Essex Resolutions. We're going to get into that with Tim Manley. He is the executive director of the Essex County Museum. Thank you for joining us, Tim.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
So this article about the resolutions discusses the history of that time and place and also describes a pretty cool event held there just this past July. We will discuss that event, but first I want to get into the history here. Can you give us some context? You're the museum director there, and so I'm sure as part of your job, you're, explaining things. I don't know if you give actual tours or not, Tim, but you've got a handle on the history there. What was going on in Essex County, Virginia in 1774? Can you set that scene for us?
Yes, Neve. Really to go back a little bit further to really kind of get the idea of just how strong that kind of revolutionary fervor was in this part of Virginia. With the Stamp Act, that's one of the first big events that really causes a lot of pushback from the colonists. And it was very much unpopular here in Essex County and in Tappahannock. Tappahannock was a very important port on the Rappahannock River. And so you had a great deal of commerce here. And the Stamp Act was not popular. It was seen as government overreach and something that was, again, taxation without representation, which, of course, is one of the big rallying cries throughout this period. The largest Stamp Act protest in Virginia took place right here in Tappahannock, and that was in 1766. And that was actually the street right next to the museum here on Prince Street. There were about 400 people who gathered here to protest against a local merchant who had said he would go along with the Stamp Act. And so you have this early fervor here to stand up for their rights and to stand up against what they viewed as government overreach and government tyranny. And with the 1774 events, you have Governor Dunmore dissolving the House of Burgess, and you've got the different Virginia counties all kind of tasked with coming up with a statement to present their view of the current events and their citizens' view so that they could explain their position on the events that were taking place at that time. And the Boston Tea Party was the kind of the match that lit this powder keg. And it was British reaction to that, the British closing of the ports, the intolerable acts, and what they viewed as this gross abuse of the citizens of Boston and the citizens of Massachusetts that led to this unifying feeling among a lot of the colonists where we must all stand together against this British tyranny or we will all suffer a similar fate. And with Essex County, this was one of the few counties that not only came out in support of Boston, but also came out in support of the Tea Party itself. Whereas a lot of the documents that were drawn up came out in support of the citizens of Boston. And in support of their rights as British citizens, most did not support the actual Tea Party itself. Most said, "Oh, well, this was a step too far." They just went a little overboard with this. Whereas in Essex, they said, "No, this was fantastic. We like that they did this. We'd like to see more of this." And it's a unique perspective, and it's one that really kind of shows you the kind of mindset that was going on in this part of Virginia at that point in time.
Yeah.
You've got...
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's fine. You've got a very well-written document is what results from that. You've got a statement of their rights as British citizens, and you've got unequivocal support for the citizens of Boston. And it was such a impactful statement that they even got a thank you letter from Boston, from Sam Adams himself. They took up a collection here in Essex to support the poor in Boston and ended up sending over 1,000 bushels of corn. Virginia corn was going to be set to support the citizens of Boston. The ship carrying it ended up getting blown off course pretty significantly. It ended up in the Leeward Islands, so several thousand miles off course. They were able to sell the corn in the Leeward Islands and then transfer the funds from the sale to Boston. And those funds arrived in Boston just a couple weeks before the battles of Lexington and Concord. So perfect timing to help support the revolutionary cause.
Wow, you covered a lot of ground there in that answer. So I want to get back to what you said, which was, you mentioned is 1766. First large protests here in Virginia regarding the Stamp Act, because you were talking about how this had been building and building and building. Was that locality in particular, Essex County, was that one of the leaders in this kind of these protests going around, or had other cities and towns been doing that already and Virginia just got on board? Or do you feel like it was a leader?
Other areas had been hotbeds of this kind of revolutionary fervor. I think that the timing was right in 1766 for Tappahannock to be kind of one of the flashpoints for this protest against the Stamp Act, and also because the man who said he was going to go along with is Archibald McCall and Archibald Ritchie were the two Scottish merchants that both said that they would go along with this Stamp Act. And Ritchie was the one who really inspired the riots, almost as they would be called, in 1766. McCall was another individual who would have further protests later on, but the Ritchie riots were the first big ones in 1766. And he was basically, they surrounded his house and told him that he was going to sign a document saying he would not support the Stamp Act, or they would force him to do so. And they basically dragged him out of his house and made him sign the document. He protested, said he wasn't going to do it until he realized he really had no chance to do anything else. And interestingly enough, he would later become a supporter of the Patriot cause. But you have kind of a cosmopolitan feel in the city at that time. It's a city that's doing a lot of trade. You've got a lot of communication with the outside world, which that's one of the things we very much take for granted today, is the ease of communication that we have. And you got to think of just how long it takes for messages to get anywhere back then. And so port cities tended to have a little more response, a rapid response to these larger events. And Tappahannock was definitely one of those places where you would have word spreading quickly.
Yeah.
So it gave them the opportunity to organize and respond faster than some of the more rural areas. But you would see similar attitudes and similar responses in other port towns. You know, the port towns were kind of the communication hubs back then.
Yeah. So Tappahannock is the oldest town in Essex County. Is that right?
Correct.
And what's it like there today? What's the feel? Is it very steeped in history? Like when you go to that town, do you feel that history right away? Is it marked throughout the city or the town?
We need more markers, and that's one of the things that we're hoping to accomplish over the next couple of years. I'm from Charleston, South Carolina myself, and was a tour guide in Charleston for many years. And that's one of the things I was kind of surprised by when I first came to Tappahannock. I knew that there's a lot of history here. There's some amazing buildings. There's the historic district here has got some fantastic stuff, but there's not a lot of markers to convey that. And coming from Charleston, every historic building in Charleston has a little plaque on it to let you know the history of the building and why it's significant. And that's one of the things we hope to do here in Tappahannock, to bring more attention to the fact that this is such a historic town and that there are a lot of really significant buildings here. There's some really cool stuff. Just down the street from us is the 1710 Tavern, which just recently reopened, which is now the oldest tavern in Virginia. And it was one of the places where a lot of these events we're talking about, like the Ritchie riots and the Essex Resolutions, a lot of these Patriot supporters would be meeting in these taverns before they went off and did these things. And the 1710 Tavern was one of those locations. It was a known meeting place for the local chapter of the Sons of Liberty. And George Washington himself, he would pass through Tappahannock on occasion when he was traveling around Virginia. And we know that he stopped and stayed in a few of the taverns here from time to time. So there's just some great history here. And it's one of the things we're trying to highlight more and more and get more people to come and experience when they come to town.
So one of the things that you all do there I guess it's every July, is the reading of the Essex Resolutions. Let's get into that. What are they? What was significant about them? So what's in the actual resolutions?
So this was the response to the intolerable acts that Essex passed, and it was agreed upon here at the courthouse, which is still standing. It's just down the street from us, is where they had the original reading of the resolutions, and it was their declaration of support for Boston, their support for their own rights as English citizens. Also, and it's important to note, with most of these proclamations, they would stress that they were still supporting the crown. At this point, they're not fully declaring rebellion. Okay. They're still supporting the crown. They still support the king, but they're airing their complaints about how they're being treated and how they view their rights as being abused. Along with that, you have several statements that support Boston. You have the statement where they say they're going to take up a collection to help support the citizens there. And it's one of those early documents where you start to see the language that will eventually evolve into this revolutionary fervor that takes control of the colonies by 1776. And it's one of those early steps that leads into the Revolutionary War, where they are clearly dissatisfied with the way the crown is reacting to citizens' complaints and citizens' reactions to crown overreach, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So your town in the summer gets together, and just like so many towns in America do, they reenact a part of our history, right? So we were talking before we started recording. You haven't been there at the Essex County Museum all that long, a few years. Is that right? 2 years, maybe?
It's about 2 years.
Yeah. So prior to this summer, there's a certain way that this reenactment, if you will, or the reading, I guess, is maybe more accurate, was done. And then this year, y'all decided to do something different. So talk about what was typical and then what you did this year that was just a little different.
So last year was the first time I was a part of the reading of the resolutions. And what they typically do is they have the resolutions read by local citizens, and you have an explanation read out as to why this was such a significant event. Now, they also will always read the thank you letter that Samuel Adams wrote to the citizens of Essex County, which is a great letter. It's very well done. And normally it's a very stoic event, it's very staid. Everyone just kind of stands and reads, and that's it. It's good for people who like history. It's good for people who are interested in learning more about that kind of things. But for average folks, it could be a little boring. I don't find it boring because I love history.
Right.
That's my thing. But not everybody loves history. For this year, since this was the 250th anniversary this year, we wanted to make it more accessible for everybody. We wanted to make it a fun event. We wanted to make it something where even people who don't really jump at the chance to hear some history would be interested in coming out and having a good time. And so we wanted to take this history and modernize it and make it something that was a little more entertaining. And so I had the thought of taking the resolutions and kind of modifying them a little bit and doing something along the lines of Hamilton. My wife loves Hamilton. She watches it constantly. Is always listening to it. And she was watching it one day, and they were doing the 10 dual commandments, if I remember correctly. I believe is what it is. And they're just counting off the dual commandments. And just hearing them count it off is like, we could do something like that with the resolutions, have some people stand up and really make it a little more theatrical. And so I got to work kind of tinkering on that, and ended up writing up something that went over very well with the crowd when it was performed. We had a couple of different things we wanted to try and do, and that was kind of the centerpiece, was just taking the resolutions and make them a little more fun. And we had it so when a resolution was read out, then you would have short rhyming interpretation, more modern interpretation of the old language that was just read, because the old stuff can be a little clunky sometimes.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
We wanted to make it a little more, have a little more rhythm to it. And so that was the centerpiece of the whole thing. And then we had several other things that all kind of fell in with it. And we had a stunt crew that came down from New York. The fellow who reached out about it actually grew up here in Tappahannock and now is a professional stuntman up in New York. And they came down and did I would call it an action movie interpretation of the Stamp Act riot of 1766. Very theatrical. They had a whole choreographed fight scene that they did, and it was just a lot of fun. We also had a colonial dance troupe who came in, and they did some traditional dancing and singing. We had different members of the Sons of the American Revolution come in. They did a color guard presentation. We had fife and drum from Williamsburg Fife and Drum Corps, who were fantastic. They led the procession in for the color guard, and just had a whole bunch of different things coming together to get people out here to just really enjoy it and have a good time. And ended up being a good bit of fun.
A good bit of fun. It sounds like it was a blast, Tim. Did anyone record it? Video?
Well, we've got some recordings. I'm trying to get them all together right now.
Okay.
I had a tablet that ended up not recording like I thought it was.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we've all been there.
Technology.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But we have some other folks who did record it. We had a tripod set up that was recording it. We're working on getting the video together. So we'll be putting some video out on our website and our social media as we get that together. As of right now, we're still in the editing process.
Yeah. So how was it received? First of all, I am assuming you promoted it. And so did you have a bigger turnout to begin with than you usually do, would you say?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Last year we had, I'd say 20 or 30 people that came out for the reading, which very brave souls. We had a huge thunderstorm roll in right in the middle of it, which made it a very lively reading as it turned out. But this year we got a grant from the Virginia 250 Commission and the Virginia Commission of the Arts to help support the event. And that gave us a lot more kind of firepower to get the word out and really promote it. And we ended up with, I'd say, just under 200 people probably.
Listen, that's great.
All total. I think the number would have been higher had the weather been better, but it was raining all day the previous day and all morning, and it looked like it was going to possibly be rained out. I was very, very worried about the weather the day previous, but it cleared up just in time. The sun came out and ended up having some nice weather. It was just really hot and humid.
Do you have a sample of maybe a line that you wrote to interpret, as the modern day interpretation of one of the resolutions that you can? I don't know if you have it in front of you, Tim, so I don't mean to put you on the spot. Do you remember any of it?
I've got one some here. Hold on. I do have a script here somewhere. Give me a second.
Okay.
Actually, I can pull one up. Give me 1 second. I can pull one up here on the computer.
And did you write the whole thing, Tim? Did you write it with someone?
No, I wrote all of it. I just took the existing resolutions and then put in my own little interpretations. I did all of it myself. I enjoy writing. That was my minor in college. I minored in creative writing, so that was something I had a lot of fun with.
That's great. But it was fun.
It was. Yeah, it's tried to keep a rhythm to it, almost like in kind of a Shakespearean kind of iambic pentameter.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
My head just kind of goes to that naturally.
Yeah.
Yeah, something about here's one from the Boston Tea Party. So the tea loss in Boston that got everyone humming. Let me tell you something, that company had it coming. It's not just the tea that doesn't belong, but all East India goods from here to Hong Kong. So, just little things like that. So,
was it fun to see other people? You said you brought in actors, as well as the stunt crew and dancers and the Williamsburg group for the music. Was it fun to see people actually bringing what you had written to life like that?
Oh yeah, I got a real kick out of that, and it was great because I was kind of behind the ladies who were performing, and that was the other thing that ended up being kind of fun is we put out a casting call to get some performers who could kind of really make the lines sing, because it's always better if you've got somebody who's a professional who can really belt the lines out and make it sound good. And we had a few responses, but they were all women. So all of our performers ended up being women for the event, which I think is actually ended up being kind of great because it flips the whole thing on its head from how it would have been done back then, because it was all men involved with that at the time. And so to take that and kind of flip it a little bit was a fun thing to do. And I think the ladies really enjoyed it. And I got to kind of be behind them as they were delivering the lines, and just seeing the lines actually get laughs from the crowd was great. Seeing the lines land. It's always good when your jokes work.
So, yeah, definitely. So next year now, Tim, it sounds like, is this going to be the new thing you do every year? How are you going to try and top it? What do you do?
No, and I told everybody that. No, that we went all out because it was the 250th.
Right.
50 years from now, they can go all out again. But yeah, next year we'll go back to being a little more relaxed in how we handle everything. So
yeah.
It was a lot of work to pull this off.
I'm sure.
And I wouldn't want to have to do that every year.
Sure. So before we wrap this up, you are the executive director there at the museum, and you mentioned that before you were here, you were in Charleston and you were a tour guide. Is that right? So you're a history buff. So I like to ask people, because this series is all about the Cardinal News 250 series, and you mentioned the Virginia 250 Commission. This is a big deal, right? This is a big commemoration that's taking place, leading up to the actual anniversary coming up, the 250th. People, as you mentioned, not everyone's a history buff, right? We're just living our lives, going around doing our thing. How do this celebration you just had in July in Essex County there, it sounded like a great example of this, but bringing history to life and getting people to understand why it matters. Because as you said, history can come off, as boring or staid or distant, irrelevant. But we all know, history is very relevant to everything that's happening today. So Does this Virginia 250 project and, period of time where we're really marking these things, is that exciting to you? How does it kind of reinvigorate you for what you do every day?
It is exciting. I think that the key to all this is to, on the one hand, acknowledge the importance of these events and talk about why they're significant, because that you've got to learn from history. At the same time, you have to acknowledge the shortcomings of that time. And that's something that you can't overlook. You have to address it kind of head on, is the fact that these are all rich white men who are doing this, and they're leaving out a lot of the people who actually live in America at this time. This as a tour guide at Monticello said, of Thomas Jefferson, he was an imperfect man with perfect ideals. And I think that's a way you have to kind of look at these events and interpret them properly today, is to talk about the fact that, yes, they are talking about liberty for all, but they don't really mean it at that point in time. It's the base that America is built on, but it took a lot of work to make it to where it really was, equality for all. And it's something we still struggle with today. And I think that's the importance of history, is to look at the struggles that people went through to get to where we are today, and to make sure we don't slide back into, some of those mistakes of the past. It's something that, historians are cursed with. Those that don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, as they say. So, it should be a subject that's stressed more often, especially with politicians. I would say.
Yeah, great. Thank you. You touched on something there. I mean, the whole point of Cardinal News 250 is to do these articles, this series that we're doing on some of the things that aren't as, groups of people who we don't hear as much about during that time, and Virginia's role in our efforts toward independence, different groups of people who just don't get credit sometimes, or, a lot of light shined on them. So well said. Well, I want to thank you for coming here today, or you're on Zoom. We do it. You're in Essex County, so if people want to head out to Essex County, they might see Tim Manley, who is the executive director of the Essex County Museum. Thank you so much for joining us, Tim. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. And anybody wants to go and check out our website, ecmhs.org. And you can learn about the museum, learn about some of the history of Essex County. We've got some wonderful archives on our website, so you can read more about the stuff we've been talking about.
And we'll be looking for that video, hopefully, if y'all can get a good recording and put it on your website or your socials. So thank you so much. Thank you for listening to Cardinal 250, made possible in part by funding from the Virginia American Revolution 250 Commission, and with help from our friends at Blue Ridge PBS. Thank you also to Lindley Estes for her work on this particular article for Cardinal News 250. And for more on Cardinal News 250, including the Cardinal 250 Project, other newsletters that we offer, go to cardinalnews.org and download our other episodes as well. There's lots of good stuff in there. I'm Dutchie Jessee for Cardinal News.
Thanks for listening to Cardinal 250, made possible in part by funding from the Virginia American Revolution 250 Commission. For more information on Cardinal News 250, including the Cardinal 250 and other newsletters, visit cardinalnews.org.